listener production.
The Super League War was a pivotal and tumultuous period in the history of rugby league in Australia and New Zealand during the mid-1990s. It was a corporate and legal battle, primarily between the Australian Rugby League, or the ARL, backed by media mogul Kerry Packer and Optus Vision, and the Super League supported by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. The conflict centred on control of broadcasting rights for rugby league, particularly pay television rights, and ultimately aimed to determine supremacy over the sport's top-tier professional competition in Australasia. This was the Packers versus the Murdochs, clubs against clubs, coaches against coaches, and players against players. It was front-page news for 2 years while the game tore itself apart. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insider's Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. The roots of the Super League War can be traced to the early 1990s, a time when rugby league was the dominant sport in New South Wales and Queensland, with significant television audiences that made broadcasting rights highly lucrative. The ARL, which governed the sport in Australia, ran the premier competition known as the Winfield Cup, which expanded significantly in the late 1980s and early 90s to include teams from outside Sydney, such as the Brisbane Broncos, Canberra Raiders, Newcastle Knights, and Auckland Warriors. By 1994, the competition had grown to 20 teams, including new franchises like the Western Reds in Perth, North Queensland Cowboys, South Queensland Crushers, and Auckland Warriors, reflecting ambitions to make rugby league a truly national sport. However, dissatisfaction simmered among some clubs, particularly those outside of Sydney, who felt the ARL's administration was overly Sydney-centric and favoured traditional clubs. The Brisbane Broncos, a powerhouse since joining the competition in 1988, were particularly vocal. Their CEO, John Rebo, believed the Sydney-based ARL would never offer the Broncos a fair deal, prompting discussions about an alternative competition as early as 1994. This discontent coincided with a broader media landscape shift as pay television was emerging in Australia. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, seeking content to drive subscriptions for its Foxtel platform, saw rugby league as a key asset. Meanwhile, Kerry Packer, who controlled the Nine network and had secured pay TV rights for rugby league through Optus Vision, was determined to protect his interests. So let's take a step back to talk about the history of rugby league. Back in the late 1800s in England, rugby football was a big deal, but it was mostly a game for the working class, run by the Northern Rugby Football Union, or NRFU for short. They were calling the shots for amateur rugby. Now, fast forward to the 1890s, the NRFU started shaking things up. At first, they made rules so players could get paid for games, which was a big deal back then. But by 1903, they changed things again, tweaking the rules to make the game what we know now as rugby league, like having 13 players on each side instead of 15, and getting rid of lineouts, which really set it apart from rugby union. So, how did this get to Australia? It all started in 1907 at Bateman's Hotel on George Street in Sydney. On August 8, about 50 people got together and decided to start a rugby league of their own, calling it the New South Wales Rugby Football League, or NSWRL for short, to keep it separate from rugby union. They held a meeting, set up a constitution, picked officials, and even chose selectors to form a New South Wales team to play professionally. By early 1908, the New South Wales Rugby League was up and running. They got 9 clubs on board: Glebe, Balmain, Newtown, South Sydney, Eastern Suburbs, Western Suburbs, Newcastle, Cumberland and North Sydney. The season began in earnest by April 1908. Later that year, the New South Wales Rugby League put together a team to represent Australia on a tour of England. They called themselves the Kangaroos, and the matches they played against the English teams were named Tests. That name stuck, and even today we use tests to describe big international rugby league matches between Australia and other countries. The Australian Rugby League was founded in 1986 to run the game nationally. The code in Australia had been principally administered by individual state leagues like the Queensland Rugby League and the New South Wales Rugby League, the ARL, on a national and international basis. These days, the Australian Rugby League Commission runs the game, the NRL and the Women's NRL, State of Origin and International Series. So back to the Super League War of the 1990s. In 1994, News Corporation began developing the Super League concept, a breakaway competition designed to rival the ARL. The objective, as outlined in secret documents, was to create a competition that could not be challenged by any other, with a focus on privately owned teams and a strong Sydney presence to maintain the sport's largest market. News proposed approaching key clubs, Brisbane, Canberra, Newcastle and Auckland, to secure long-term commitments, while offering concessions to the ARL, such as allowing it to retain control over test matches and providing grants to promote the game. These plans were formalised in a Super League confidentiality deed sent to select clubs in December 1994, with a full presentation plan for the ARL in February 1995. John Rebo, at the time, famously said the players would one day be superstars in China. The Super League War officially erupted in early 1995 with a series of dramatic events that exposed the depth of the rift. On February 6, News Limited executive David Smith addressed ARL clubs about the Super League concept, but the meeting was disrupted by Kerry Packer, who threatened legal action for breach of contract, signalling his intent to defend the ARL's position. By March 29, the Canterbury Bulldogs became the first club to have players sign with Super League at a secret meeting in the Rocks in Sydney, marking a significant defection. The following day, News Limited initiated federal court action against the ARL, New South Wales Rugby League and 6 clubs, alleging breaches of the Trade Practices Act after they notified the ARL of their intent to split. On April 1st, Peter Moore, a Canterbury official and ARL board member, resigned, and clubs like Canberra, Canterbury and Cronulla were ordered to show cause why they should not be expelled from the ARL competition. The ARL responded aggressively, with Chairman Ken Arthurson threatening to expel the Brisbane Broncos and pushing for loyalty agreements to lock clubs and players into the ARL for 3 to 5 years. By mid-1995, the battle lines were drawn. News Corporation was signing clubs and players with lucrative contracts, while the ARL, backed by Packer's financial muscle, countered with its own deals to retain talent. For some players, it was life-changing money. Steve Edmed was a good, honest, hard-working forward at the Balmain Tigers. His career was coming to an end. He worked throughout his rugby league career as a carpenter. He was signed on a 3-year, $800,000 a year deal to join Super League. The money changed his life. There were dozens of players who signed massive contracts. Wendell Saylor went from a $75,000 contract to being offered $500,000 a year with a $500,000 sign-on fee. Here, Wendell explains to the Triple M Dead Set Legends radio show how it blew up almost overnight.
93 I came in, that was my first year, and I played I think 3 first-grade games. And then 94 was probably my sort of breakout year. I think I played about 20, 21 games. I was lucky enough to go on that Kangaroo tour because Willie Kahn was injured. Bob Fulton was a massive fan. There was a young Steve Menzies and myself. So we went on a kangaroo tour. That put me in good stead. 95, there's a bit of talk about Super League coming around. I think I'd re-signed for 2 or 3 more years. Not on massive money because they had all the big dogs.
Yeah.
But it was still about learning, I suppose. So I ended up signing with the Broncos for a couple of years, but my manager at the time, Barry Collins, said, look, if this Super League comes in, John Rebo, this is what Dell will get, blah, blah, blah. So signed off on that. Sure enough, overnight, just went bang. My manager rings me, goes, mate, just to let you know, I've got a check for you, and you're on $300,000 for the first year, $300,000 the second year, $350,000 the third year.
What were you on before?
$75,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went 75 to 300, 350,
Yeah.
and the check. What was the check?
$100,000.
What did you do with the $100,000 check?
Bought mum and dad a house and a car at the time. So we're locked in with that, and we're fine with that. Then we got a call saying, hey, listen, the ARL want to talk to you guys too. And we said, well, we can't. We've locked in. And I signed because, mate, the Broncos give me an opportunity.
So
and
who
that.
was going to talk to you from the ARL? Was it like James Packer?
No. So we got a call. So we went to the airport. This was a couple of days later. So the manager goes, look, just go and listen to them and see what they got to say. As I jump in the car to drive there, the manager goes, just listen to what they got to say. As we walk in, you walk in, and I'd never really met Phil Gould before, even though you knew who Phil Gould was.
Yeah.
There was Gus Gould. And then there was James Packer.
Oh.
So they were like, saying, mate, I'm still like, don't forget, I'm not that old myself, and I know what I've signed. So they sat down, and then Gus said, this is the way that we see you. I said, oh, look, to be honest, I've signed. I just came to listen to what you're going to say.
Did they put an offer on the table?
Yeah, they did.
What did they offer?
So he said, look, Bob Fulton's got a massive rap on you. I know that you're the Broncos now. If there's a club that you'd like to go to, we can organise that. And I said, oh, but I've already taken the check and this. And he said, no, our lawyers will pick up the tab. So this is what we'll do for you. You give us your bank account. We'll put $500,000 in your bank account in the next couple of days.
What?
The first year you'll go 500,000, second 500,000, and the third year 550. That's what he said. And I'm sitting there going like, what? How can I go from? I was on $75,000 about like 4 days ago, but you know what? Because I'm loyal and I did the right thing when I left there, made the right decision, stuck with the Broncos.
What?
Coming up, the sport divided. How a massive legal challenge changed the game of rugby league forever. The Super League secured commitments from several clubs including Brisbane, Canberra, Canterbury, Cronulla, Auckland, Penrith, North Queensland and the Western Reds, and introduced 2 new teams, the Adelaide Rams and the Hunter Mariners based in Newcastle. The ARL retained loyalty from clubs like Sydney City Roosters, St George Dragons, Illawarra Steelers, Gold Coast Chargers, Balmain Tigers, Western Suburbs Magpies, North Sydney Bears, the Manly Sea Eagles, South Queensland Crushers, Parramatta Eels, Newcastle Knights, and the South Sydney Rabbitohs. The division split the sport, with players, fans, and administrators forced to choose sides. The Super League war was as much a legal battle as a sporting one, with both sides engaging in protracted court cases to assert control. In February 1995, the Brisbane Broncos launched federal court action against the ARL over salary cap rules, a precursor to broader legal challenges. News Limited's March 30, 1995 lawsuit against the ARL alleged anti-competitive behaviour, seeking to prevent the ARL from enforcing club loyalty agreements. The ARL, in turn, fought to protect its intellectual property, including club names, logos and colours, arguing that defecting clubs were bound by existing contracts. A significant victory for the ARL came on February 23, 1996, when Justice James Burchett delivered a ruling described as a 100-0 win for the ARL. He found that clubs were bound by loyalty agreements, that the ARL owned club branding, and that News Limited and Super League had acted with dishonesty and duplicity. The court banned Super League from operating until 2000 and ordered it to pay its players to participate in the ARL competition. That decision would later be overturned. Indeed, the victory was short-lived. On October 4, 1996, a full bench of the federal court overturned all 37 of Justice Burchett's orders, clearing the way for Super League to launch in 1997. This roller coaster of legal outcomes prolonged the uncertainty and deepened the sports division. Players also faced legal challenges. For example, in December 1995, the New South Wales Industrial Court declared Super League contracts of 4 Canterbury players, Dean Pay, Jason Smith, Jim Dimmick and Jared McCracken, void, allowing them to join the ARL-aligned Parramatta Eels. Similarly, players like Anthony Mundine and Gordon Tallis faced court orders or suspensions for their Super League affiliations, highlighting the personal toll of the conflict. In 1997, the worst-case scenario materialised. 2 rival competitions ran concurrently. The ARL competition featured 12 teams and followed a traditional 22-round format with a 4-week playoff series culminating in a grand final. The Super League competition with 10 teams ran a shorter 18-round season, also ending in a grand final, followed by an expanded World Club Challenge pitting Australian Super League clubs against European counterparts. The ARL competition was more competitive, with clubs like Parramatta, Newcastle and Manly performing strongly. Newcastle upset Manly 22-16 in the ARL Grand Final, a memorable moment for fans. Super League, dominated by the Brisbane Broncos, saw them win 14 of 18 matches and defeat Cronulla 26-8 in the Grand Final, attended by almost 60,000 people at Brisbane's ANZ Stadium. However, Super League struggled with weaker teams like the Adelaide Rams, North Queensland Cowboys, Western Reds and Hunter Mariners, which failed to attract significant viewership or crowds. The split had a profound impact on the sport's integrity. State of Origin in 1997 was lacklustre, as Super League players were excluded and the series lacked the usual intensity. Super League actually ran a State of Origin series of its own. Again, it lacked the intensity of previous series. The ARL's international presence was crippled, with only 1 test match against a rest-of-the-world team, while Super League secured control over international competitions like the Oceania Cup and World Club Challenge. There were separate test teams in 1997 as well. Australia played as both an ARL and Super League side. The World Nines, a Super League innovation, gained some traction, but overall, the divided competitions diluted the sport's appeal and financial viability. The Super League war had devastating effects on many clubs. The ARL's South Queensland Crushers folded after 1997, unable to compete with the Super League-backed Brisbane Broncos. The Gold Coast Chargers were also culled as part of the peace agreement to reduce the number of teams. Super League's Adelaide Rams and Hunter Mariners were disbanded, with the latter facing intense local opposition in Newcastle, an ARL stronghold. The writing was on the wall. Mergers such as St George Dragons and Illawarra Steelers forming St George Illawarra, and attempted mergers like Manly and North Sydney or the Northern Eagles, which later collapsed, reshaped the sports landscape. The players benefited financially as both sides offered unprecedented contracts to secure talent. Stars like Laurie Daly for Super League and Brad Fittler for the ARL became faces of their respective competitions, with Fittler's move to the Sydney City Roosters on a record-breaking deal, symbolising the ARL's determination to win. However, the financial arms race strained club budgets, and many players faced legal battles or public backlash for their choice of sides. The war also disrupted team cohesion, as seen with the South Queensland Crushers, where players were divided between ARL and Super League loyalties. Despite the chaos, the Super League war introduced several innovations that shaped modern rugby league. Super League pioneered the zero tackle rule, which was later modified, 20-metre scrum placements, and the World Nines format, which influenced the NRL's Auckland Nines. The ARL introduced the 40-20 rule, which remains a fan favourite. Super League also trialled the video referee in its 1996 World Nines, a technology later adopted league-wide. These changes, while innovative, were often overshadowed by the war's negative publicity. Super League's promise of a global, glitzy competition clashed with Rugby League's working-class roots, alienating some fans who valued tradition over commercialisation. By late 1997, both sides were hemorrhaging money, with estimates suggesting over $1 billion was spent during the war. The financial unsustainability, coupled with fan fatigue and declining viewership, forced negotiations. Secret talks between ARL's Ian Frickberg and News Limited's Neil Whittaker, ongoing for 5 months, culminated in a peace deal announced on December 19, 1997. The agreement outlined a merged competition, the National Rugby League, or NRL, to begin in 1998 as a 50-50 partnership between News Limited and the ARL. Key terms included a 20-team competition in 1998, reduced to 16 in 1999 and 14 by 2000. News Limited would fund a new team in Melbourne, the Melbourne Storm. There was to be shared pay TV coverage between Foxtel and Optus until 2002. The ARL would retain control over the state of origin and international matches. The deal was painful, resulting in the culling of 9 clubs, including the foundation club, South Sydney, later reinstated in 2002 after legal action. Not to mention the mergers that alienated fans. The NRL's formation marked the end of the war, but left scars, with many clubs and communities feeling betrayed by the rationalisation process. The Super League war's legacy is complex. On one hand, it modernised rugby league, forcing the ARL to adapt and embrace national expansion. The NRL, now a professional and competitive league, owes its existence to the merger. Innovations like the video referee, the 40-20 rule, and the salary cap, which was strengthened post-war, improved the game's fairness and spectacle. The war also elevated player salaries, empowering athletes and their managers. On the other hand, the war inflicted lasting damage. It alienated fans, particularly in Sydney, where traditional clubs were merged or culled, and set back the sport's national ambitions. The loss of teams like Perth and Adelaide delayed rugby league's growth in non-traditional markets. It's taken 25 years for Perth to re-emerge as a rugby league city with the introduction of the Perth Bears earlier this year. They'll join the competition in 2027. A team based in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea will join the competition in 2028. The war exposed the Australian Rugby League's diminished influence, and News Corporation's significant control over the NRL raised concerns about media ownership in sport, a debate that persists today. Internationally, the ARL's loss of influence weakened rugby league's global presence, with Super League dominating competitions outside Australia. The war also highlighted rugby league's cultural tensions, its working-class roots versus the push for commercialisation, and Sydney's dominance versus national aspirations. The 1995 State of Origin series, where ARL-aligned Queensland players like Trevor Gilmeister became folk heroes, underscored the sport's resilience and appeal, but also its resistance to change. Paul Vaughton's Queensland team of unknowns beat Phil Gould's Blues team full of stars. The Super League war was a defining moment for rugby league, a battle driven by corporate greed, media rivalries, and a struggle for control. It exposed the sport's vulnerabilities, but also its enduring appeal. The formation of the NRL in 1998 was a pragmatic resolution, but the war's costs, financial, emotional, and cultural, were immense. Today, the NRL thrives as a leading competition, but debates over expansion, club rationalisation, and media influence echo the war's unresolved issues. The Super League war serves as a cautionary tale for sports tempted by breakaway leagues, reminding us that while innovation is vital, unity is the foundation of any game's survival. Thanks for listening to Crime Insider's Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at Listener Crime or TikTok at Listener Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins. Thanks for listening. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.